Ah, the man, the myth, the legend, the great Scott Horton. What's up, brother?
Hey, I'm good, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well.
Good to
You
hear.
know, the store closed, that I was working at, the store closed, uh, and right in October, right? The 2 days before I left for my vacation in Namibia. And then, so when I got back, it was just like I hit the ground running trying to get transferred to another location. And so now I'm working out of the distribution center and I'm working 4 days a week. The drive to work is quite a bit longer. I was when I was working at the store, it was like 7 minutes from the house, but now the drive is about an hour and 15 minutes every day.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Just knock out more podcasts, man.
I try, man. I try. It is a lot like driving over the road. I do have a lot more time to listen to podcasts now than I did before. So
I mean, it's been years since we had Z102, the classic rock station, man. So now it's just a pale imitation of what was KLBJ before they got rid of Dale Dudley. And then, like, so what is there to
yeah.
listen to on the radio?
There,
NPR. You ever do
yeah.
that? You ever listen to the ladies on NPR? It's the
Uh-uh.
crazy shit, man. You should
Really.
try it sometime. It's a trip.
We have the talk radio station down here that has oh, what's his name? Michael. Oh, I can see his face and I can hear his voice, but I can't think of his name. Michael Berry. He's on there. I don't know if y'all get him in Austin, but he's been on Houston talk radio for like 20 years or something like that. And does political talk radio. Your average,
It has
like,
some good ones. I used to, part of my political radicalization when I was a kid was listening to a lot of talk radio. And in Austin, we had libertarians, not just right wingers, but we had real ass libertarians who were good on virtually everything. Um, and in fact, I've told this story before about how I lost an argument about Waco to some jerk in my cab just because he knew a lot about it. And I kind of got caught on a couple of things. And I was like,
mm.
rah, I'm going to read all about Waco now or whatever. But actually, before that, the first time I was 16, and the first time I had tuned into AM radio, I was driving my car down 183, and I'm like, I have no idea what's on the AM band in my own town. And I was flipping through, and it was KLBJ AM, and it was Johnny Walker, who was the FM DJ,
Mm.
but he was like filling in because they didn't have a guy. So he was filling in on the AM side. But his whole thing was, hey, man, I'm just a rock and roll DJ. I don't know about these things. I am literally just hosting. This is the guest. We're taking your calls. And he had no opinions at all. He's just hosting the thing. He was a great guy, Johnny Walker. And then the guest was a surviving Branch Davidian.
Mm.
And the callers knew all about it and had all this important stuff to add to it. And that was the very first time I ever heard right wing AM radio in would have been, I don't know what, 19, must have still been 93 or maybe 94.
Mm.
When did I turn 16? I don't remember. Maybe I was 17 or 18. Anyway, I guess I was 17. Anyway, so yeah, man, what a cool thing. That was what was neat about it was that any jerk can pick up a phone and now that's equivalent to being the DJ and having the whole radio audience available to you.
Right.
And it's like a free market thing too, where if you're not right, the next caller is going to say that's not right. And you know what I mean? Like there's a whole,
Hmm.
it was great. It's Twitter before there was Twitter.
Yeah.
That was what I loved about it. It was like the access. Cause back then, of course, there's no internet. So it's like, how does a regular guy get access to be able to not just hear opinions, but to have them, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Out there and put them out there. And so that was the genius of it back then. And that was why the elite hated it so much, because you could get a real expression of what people believed out here in the land between New York and LA.
Yeah, I need to get Lance Zernline on. He's the producer for Michael Berry's show, and he's kind of like a paleo conservative. He kind of like rides the line between paleo conservative and libertarian.
Mhm.
And Michael Berry's kind of like between paleo conservative and neocon. He's like rides the line between Buchanan and George W. Bush. He's kind of somewhere in there, you know. Um, but yeah, that's an entertaining show. I need to get in touch with Lance Zierlein. I remember him back from the days when he worked for a sports radio show there in Houston, 1560 The Game. They did this evening. It was this kind of like this. it was basically a podcast before there were podcasts. It was an evening show that would come on in like on Friday nights or Saturday nights, depending on how Lance was feeling, and they called it the Blue Light Cemetery Show because there's an old cemetery in Bear Creek in the Houston area, and there's a gas that's released from the ground, and when it's foggy out, it's like everything's blue, and it looks like there are blue lights all over the place, and so everybody like talked about how it was haunted and stuff like that, and they called it the Blue Light Cemetery. So he used to do a show called the Blue Light Cemetery Show and just talking pop culture and just BSing, because when 1560 came on, it was just like three or four hosts, and they basically only hosted during the day. So the airwaves were dead all night long. So like on Friday nights, Lance would go in there and get drunk and just talk shit. It was hilarious and just take calls, and we would just all be bullshitting, and so we would meet up at places and watch ball games and just hang out. They were all cool dudes. That was a really neat time in Houston sports radio history. It was pretty wild. It was a lot of fun.
That's cool. I just quit KPFK. I've been on there for 15 years and they suck and I'm over it. So, well, the management, I still love the radio station, the people there, whatever. I don't know. But I haven't lived in LA in 15 years and um, I was just tired of being tied to having to produce that show for them and edit it and all that deadline every week and whatever. So,
Yeah.
uh, and there are some other things that I'll leave unmentioned, but I
Mm.
finally just now, like last week, made my final break with terrestrial radio. I've been doing FM radio there for, I started out doing pirate radio here and then um, had a show there since 2010, I guess. Um, but it's funny because
You had mentioned a while back that you were thinking about doing a full-time radio show, I guess in the Austin area. You had talked about wanting to get back into it. I imagine with the whole book, writing the book, and we'll talk about that here in a minute, but I would imagine with the scheduling, it was just impossible. Are you still considering
yeah.
doing that?
Yeah, I'd like to. I still have to knock out the audio book. It's always something, but
Mm.
I did have to put the show on the back burner to get the book finished. And that's still the case with the audiobook. It's a huge mountain to climb. And I think I finally figured out something like a doable system for getting it recorded and edited by myself without having a sound engineer here to babysit me while I do it. It's 770,000 words. So it's going to be, no, 475,000 words. Let me say 477. Um,
It was
so
770,000 before you edited
yeah,
it.
no, so yeah, that's just my nightmare. I take that back. God. Um, but it's 477 is what it is.
Mm.
Um, so it's going to take a very long time to produce the whole thing, and that's my
Yeah.
highest priority now. But then, yes, like essentially, I'm not a writer. I'm a radio host. That's what I want to do is radio, and what I'd like to do, essentially, is I want to do a live AM, like right wing AM radio. KPFK is like left of the dial, woke radio thing. I never did fit in there very well anyway, which is okay because, as in a way, I was helping to demonstrate to them that like you don't have to be a leftist to be against this stuff. Look
Mm.
at me, for example. But I would really, if I think there is still such a thing really as right wing AM radio out there. The problem is, of course, is it's all very Zionist, and that's as soon as I stick up for the Palestinians, that'll be a deal killer there. But or even any issue related to Israel and America or any of that. Um, but uh, that's what I would like is to have a nationwide syndicated AM radio show, but also streaming live via every brand new high tech thing that there is to stream on as well, and then have a call screener and take calls. Like which you can have fun with prank calls anyway, but um, take calls and have an open thing and make it be 3 hours long and make it be everything. Cause that's how I really feel. I want to comment on every single thing. It kills
Mhm.
me to let things go uncommented upon. This sucks, especially it seems I always write my books during an election year. It's like, oh man, like that's happened to me. I did that 3 times in a row. on all three books that I wrote. I wrote them right when I would have loved to have been commentating about what was going on in the thing. So it's life's a series of trade-offs, you know.
Yeah.
Um, but yes, ultimately, man, what I really want is to copy G. Gordon Liddy, who was to me like the epitome of the greatest AM radio host of that era. Um, at least he stuck up for the Branch Davidians. He was certainly bad on a lot of things, but Liddy's show was killer. Like he was clearly the man, but he had his engineer and his board op and his call screener and Jimmy the Google boy. Everyone had a microphone and everybody's participating. And it's not just like Rush Limbaugh on his microphone. It's a
Mm.
room full of people doing their show every day. And you can hear the table and you can hear the pen and the paper. And you know that they're friends and you can hear them talking. They're not just voices in your car. You picture the actual environment of the people. You get to really be a part of it with them. And they got all the time in the world. Ah, did you hear about the thing? Hey, did you hear the one about the priest and the rabbi went into the bar and did you whatever? Wall Street Journal says this, New York Times says that. We got an interview with a guy, and then we got to stop and sell some razor blades and then come back again and do it. Yeah, I mean, to me, um, that is what I would like to do for the long term, and then hopefully make enough money doing that to help support the institute, my
Mm.
little old institute.
It's that reminds me of I'm not familiar with Liddy's radio program, but that kind of reminds me of the way the Beck program's set up. Because all them guys have been working together for years. They've known each other for decades,
Yeah,
and they started off as a morning show, as a morning radio show, doing like the goofy morning drive show or whatever, and like a Bob and Tom or something like that. And that's how they started off. And so they kind of have that kind of dynamic there where they're all goofing on each other and laughing a lot and joking. And it's
right,
kind of the levity, adding the levity to the politics, because politics can be so overwhelming.
right.
It's nice to hear at times, even if I
Yeah, and
don't
Liddy
agree.
was funny.
Yeah,
You
even
know,
if I
Liddy.
don't agree with them on everything, it's just kind of nice to have that kind of breakup,
Right.
of like, yeah, we can laugh about some of this stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
So let's talk about the book for a minute. It took you what, 12 years? 13 years? It took a while.
Took 2 years, two and a half.
Took two and a
I
half years. It,
and
and
I really didn't do much for a couple of periods of time in there. The first half of 22, I was working really hard on the Libertarian Party takeover stuff.
mm,
So I wasn't able to do much until the summer. And then there were other things that interrupted me from time to time, publishing other people's books and other things. But overall, it's taken about, since the beginning of the war. So 3 years, 2.5 years. I
right.
finished it like last fall. So, um, and yeah, it's just a massive research project, is what it is. It's me saying, "Hey, Tommy, look at what I found, man. This is everything I found, and
Right.
I couldn't figure out what to leave out, so it's all in there."
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
so,
Well, and one of the things that I found so awesome about this book. I mean, because all your books have been great, but one of the things I found awesome about this book is the opportunity that it offered you. Because people have been starting to recognize, because people are really interested in this war. And I think by the time you wrote Fool's Errand and Enough Already, people were kind of over the terror wars and they didn't really want to hear about it anymore. But you
right.
wrote this book right at the right time. And so you captured the imagination of people, and it's given you opportunities like to go on Pierce Morgan, 2 times and have conversations with Colonel Douglas McGregor, which I thought was awesome, you know.
Well, yeah. I mean, let me tell you about that. McGregor is great, and I went to Florida to hang out with him and record that show where he interviewed me. But I got to spend a day and a half with him or two,
Mhm.
uh, just shooting the shit, talking about all kinds of things. And man, I learned so much from that guy. That's an interview coming up. I really regret. I thought about it at the time, but I'm too damn dumb to do it. I should have gone straight back to my hotel and jotted down notes and don't forget, oh, he said this and this and this. I learned so much stuff. But now I want to make sure like what all of that was on the record or whatever before I repeat any of it in public.
Mm, yeah.
But man, I had some breaking news. I was really kicking myself that I didn't sit down and interview him one last real good time before I published the book. Because man, there's some things that he told me that belong in that book, boy. God dang it. God dang it. But yeah, no, man, he was there
Part
to give me,
two.
oh, Tommy. Um, you're gonna find out though. You'll be like, oh, that was what he was talking about. You're gonna
Yeah.
know. Um, but yeah, and he's great, man. He's so smart on so much stuff. And then yeah, and I got to debate his boss, Wesley Clark, on Pierce
Mm,
Morgan, which was
yeah,
fun.
that's right.
Pretty sure I
Yeah.
won. So that was nice. I could have done better if I'd talked with Doug first, but
Yeah, but that's really cool that you've gotten to, you're kind of getting out there. One of the things that Pete and I always said, when your name would come up is it's criminal, how underrated you are as a voice for the anti-war movement, and how we have to suffer so much of this left-wing politic just to get to the anti-war subject whenever we know you're right there, and people could be finding you, and it's nice to see you finally getting your flowers.
well, thanks. And a lot of that is my own fault too, because I keep dropping out of society to write a book every couple of years for the last, since 2016, almost the last 10
Right.
years. Dave Smith called me up and was like, "Hey man, listen, you've been gone from Twitter too long. Like you gotta let me have you back on the show. Like we gotta get you back out in the mix, dude. You're like way off hermitizing where no one can find you and people are forgetting about you quickly. You gotta like, was I don't know what against all trade-offs and time spent. I
Right.
had to quit Twitter. And this is the other thing is like I can only abuse it, not just use it, right? When it comes
Yeah.
to that damn infernal website. And so I had to quit it again to do the audiobook. I just
Yeah.
if I'm gonna get up and start tweeting about Israel in the morning, I'm never gonna get to work on anything else, and that can't be my full time job. Tweeting about things that make me angry. Like I got more substantive work I got to do, so I'll have to figure out how to use Twitter to distribute that work without spending my whole day on there somehow. Um, but I so it's self-inflicted in that way. And as you said, I wrote those other books and they're so great, but they were both the Afghan war and the broader terror war, at least in the public imagination, were basically over by
Hmm.
that time. I mean, there were still a few more years to go, but it was essentially that era had come to an end with the end of Obama, at least.
Right.
My first book on Afghanistan came out in the first year of Trump. And so um as great as they were, I think you're right that they didn't really capture people's attention because they were already over those subjects anyway. Um, but so yeah, this is helping a bit, I guess, and it's just I like to say I think this is basically right that there's not that much writing in the book. Um, it's really just as an economy of words, honestly trying to just move you from one set of facts to the next through. And in other words, like it's really concise on a lot of different topics. But I don't think that the only times where I beat a dead horse to death, it's totally clear. And I say it up front. Well, the burden of proof is on me. So buckle up, everybody. Here it goes. And you know what I mean? Like on the Ukrainian Nazis, there's a whole
Right.
industry saying there's no Ukrainian Nazis and you're a fool if you say that or a Russian if you say that. And I go, okay, well, we're going to go ahead and document this in a way that everyone will know what the truth is by the end
Right.
for sure. Um, and so, but the rest of the time, I really am trying to, like, even on Russiagate, it's 75 pages of the book is Russiagate. But then it's like Page, Papadopoulos, Flynn, DNC hack, blah, 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 and try to go quickly through. I try not
Right.
to belabor any particular point too much. And it's funny because, like, one thing that I did in preparing the book, of course, was reread a lot of Justin Raimondo because one, he taught me a lot of what I know, but two, I'm the one who put all those links in his articles for 10 years. So it ain't stealing for me to go back and poach my own. Um, so I reread a lot of Justin. God, he is great and smart back then, especially W. Bush years, early Obama. just nothing better. Um, but there's so much of him talking and thinking and explaining and writing in there that I just don't do that. I'm just not that smart or not that kind of smart. I'm the guy that puts the footnotes in his articles. That's who I am. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And so like, um, but I think in a book this long and with this many subjects covered in it, hopefully that's a benefit, right? That like
Hmm.
if I had extra paragraphs of me talking and thinking at you throughout the book, it probably would be, half again as long and intolerable. So it's I think it may be frustrating to people too sometimes that like a subject ends and then I'm not like tying everything up with a nice little thing and this is how this totally relates to every other thing in this way and whatever. I just like here's a bunch of shit that happened. All right, next subject. Hopefully you can make hide and hair of it, right? But I don't really know. But I hope it's well organized enough that you see what I'm getting at, you know?
I told Beatrix, we were laughing when the book came in, and I was like, I was like, this is only half of what he wrote. Like he
Yeah.
edited out about half of the book. I was like, he could release a part two. It's like, you could just release a book on what you edited out of the book.
It's true. I did cut most of what I cut. Well, much of what I cut was excessive block quotes.
Mm,
Um, and not too excessive. I would have liked to have kept many of them, but I just couldn't. Like that was my first major move when I edited. You're right. It was up to 1,400 pages long.
yeah.
Um, and that was my first major edit was going through and nuking almost every block quote. I think there's probably a dozen block quotes in the whole book now, maybe less. Um, because I just had to add, he added in the middle and make it part of the preceding paragraph without
Right.
making it a separate space and a separate thing, just to save pages. I just had to do
Hmm.
it. Um, and shorten them down quite a bit. But all that's for the best anyway. Like, all those things needed to be edited down as concise as possible anyway. Take the few most important statements whoever made in whatever context. Um, but yeah, I don't know. There's a thing too, right? Where like this is and we're libertarian populists out here in the world, right? So this book is for the American people. It's not really for academia or for Washington. They're not going to read it or care about it, right?
Hmm.
Like this is just like, us telling each other about what they are doing is really what
Right.
the book is in a way. So, I don't expect it to have any effect on the overall narrative in Corridors of Power at all. That, well, this guy wrote this book and he really made some good points in there because they're not going to listen to a guy like me. Oh, the guy from antiwar.com says we shouldn't be doing this, huh? Well, you know what I mean? To them,
Yeah.
they're just not even going to listen. It, you know, unless, I don't know, if they were like, wow, Mearsheimer said that, and they like really took that seriously and wanted to read it. But I don't know. We'll see how far it goes. I'm doing a debate at Dartmouth University, which I come to find out is an Ivy League, like big shot, fancy pants
Hmm.
university. Which I didn't even know that. I don't even know. It's in New Hampshire, apparently. Um, and I'm debating Eli Lake like this Sunday. And the professors tried to meddle and change the question. And in a weird kind of a way. Um, and I'm not sure exactly what that signifies. I mean, so the question originally was worded as just straight word for word from the subtitle of the book. America started the new Cold War with Russia and the catastrophe in Ukraine.
Hmm.
And they wanted to change it to say America didn't do enough to stop Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So I'm like, okay. So on one hand, they're making it easy for me because like, well, the war happened. Obviously, Biden didn't do enough to stop it. Like, I don't know. They're like lowering the bar of my argument on the face of it, but not really. What they're really doing is they're baking into the question that Russia started it.
Yeah.
But you heard me. I said America started it. That's the subtitle of the book. I'm perfectly happy to defend it.
Hmm.
But they think that they get to like cheat and somehow rewrite the question that we're debating and make it say something else. And then I don't know. The final question is basically the same as what I said in the first place anyway. I just
Yeah.
didn't say, um, and the war in Ukraine, because I just said Cold War. You can't have war twice in your same subtitle. You know what I mean? It had to be something.
Yeah.
So I call it the catastrophe in Ukraine. Everybody knows what I'm talking about. The 22 through war that is still going on right now.
Right.
You know what I mean? Um, and everybody knows that Russia moved their tanks in 2022. Like, I'm not denying that in my title or in the question, but they just felt like they had to somehow intervene and like put me on my back foot and score a point against me in the very question itself. I'm like, no, it was Barack Obama who started the war, not Vladimir Putin. Putin escalated it, but he did not start it. So
Hmm.
tough. And I'm perfectly happy to debate Eli Lake and every Dartmouth professor. They can bring it and they'll lose. But it just, that's at least, I guess, an early kind of indication that they don't want to hear this stuff. You know,
Is
I
this
mean,
going to
they
be
agreed to
something we
let me
can
debate it.
watch?
Huh?
Is this going to be something we can watch? Like,
Yeah,
is it going to be
it's
put
a
out?
Gene Epstein Soho Forum debate.
Oh,
You
okay.
know, eventually
Okay,
it'll be
cool.
up at Reason Magazine and everything.
Nice. Nice. Well, I know you're ready for that. I don't foresee these, the thing about professors that I've come to find out, going through and listening to some of them give speeches and stuff like that, they're all in such a bubble that they think that the way they think is the only way to think about things. And and so I don't think you're going to have any issues going up there and just wiping the floor with whoever they throw at you, whether it's Eli Lake or anybody else.
Yeah, I mean, I fought with I didn't do the best job on this. I admit. I know some people liked it or whatever, but I should not have lost my cool with Neil Ferguson. It would have been funnier if I hadn't. Um I could have still
Who's
insulted him,
that?
but yeah, I got all pissed off. I should have not. But the point is though that I still whooped his ass. Like if you just took the text of the interview and left my, BS out of it, I beat him on every point. He didn't know what he was talking about. He's like, "Oh, promise not to expand NATO East." Well, James Baker said this one thing this one time, but that became null and void later. It's like, dude, you don't even know the first thing about
Mm,
this. You can't step to me on this, dude. You don't know nothing. And so and all the more reason that I should have kept my cool and been like Professor Horton instead of Pirate Radio Horton at the time. You know what I mean? I would have done a better job. It's just I've hated that son of a bitch so bad for like 20 years. I've never even seen his smug, ugly face before or heard him talk out loud before. I've only just read him and read about him and have a grudge against him for helping lie us into war with Iraq 20 years ago,
yeah.
demanding that we take up the mantle of the British Empire and dominate the planet. So I was quick to anger that morning, unfortunately, but still, he's like the best they got, and he totally sucks.
Well,
You know?
I got to give you props on that too, because that is something I have noticed here this go round, and I don't know if it's something you're doing consciously, but you have been a lot less combative with a lot of these conversations that you're having with people, and I've noticed that because I was like, 5 years ago, Scott would have just ripped you a new asshole and wouldn't have thought twice about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure about the sample here. Like, part of it is I'm speaking to bigger audiences that don't know me.
Mm,
So I'm trying really hard to keep that in mind. That like none
mm,
of these people have a reason to take me seriously at all, quite frankly. Like I'm not a
right.
professor of anything from anywhere. Like who the hell am I to tell anyone anything? I'm gonna have to prove myself to everyone moment by moment, or they're gonna turn away. So like on the Pierce Morgan show, I was up against Wesley Clark, who I could have barbecued on all kinds of things that he did wrong, including bombing cardboard tanks for 10 weeks and not accomplishing a damn thing, right? And that's the least of it. But I went into that knowing, well, first of all, I knew that I had at least somewhat won his respect in our previous exchange on the Morgan show when we were all on a big panel thing
Right.
together. I had at least said some facts that showed that I knew what I was talking about. I didn't just have an opinion up there. So by the end of that, I knew I had at least won his respect enough that like he's going to show up and do a one-on-one debate with me, and he's not just going to say I'm a Russian propagandist or whatever. He's going to argue in good faith. Like I know that's how he's going to approach it. And then I know that if I accuse him of any particular thing, all I have to stand on is, well, that's what the newspaper said or something, right? Which is not good enough compared to he is the firsthand source. Quite frankly, like in not in my world, but in the world I live in, he's a
Hmm.
4-star general. former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO forces in Europe at war.
Yeah.
That's pretty special compared to guy who wrote a couple of books from his website or whatever kind of thing. So I got no reason for anyone watching, and Piers Morgan has millions of viewers, millions, none
Hmm.
of whom have ever heard of me. And none of whom have a reason to give me the benefit of the doubt over this guy. So I can't make it about any decision that he ever made wrong. The only decision that he ever made that I talk about in there is I accuse him of being right, and accuse him of being right the first time before Bill Clinton overruled him and he changed his mind that we should not be doing this because we're going to pick a fight with the Russians and we should not do that. But
Right.
you know what I mean? Like that was the only way I could attack him was by like giving him credit for being right in an earlier life. And so, but that was the way I had to approach that, was like hands in pockets, right? There's no way I can like come out swinging against a general when he's just going to be like, no, that's not right. I was there. And let me tell you, young man, Jack said to me, blah, blah, blah. He can just say whatever he wants, right? And
Right.
just, you know,
Yeah, and it was an interesting conversation because you could tell there was a mutual respect. I mean, obviously, all the work you've done over the years, you knew who Wesley Clark was, what his contributions were. You kind of have an idea of where he stands on war and how he looks at the United States foreign policy. So you kind of knew how to walk that line with him because you already kind of understood who he was. And so and just that vibe that you put out, he just returned it back to you and he gave you exactly what you were giving him. I did find the first time when y'all were on the panel, he took a shot at you. It was just kind of like it was kind of like almost under his breath. He's like, yeah, well, we don't need to be, spouting Russian propaganda or something like that. And you didn't bite on it. And I was like, that's smart. Don't bite on it and don't give him a reason to double down. And so you didn't bite on it. And I think the way that you were respectful to him, there was a moment in that when you were on the panel, you interrupted him and he was like, excuse me, let me finish what I'm saying. And you're like, yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. And I thought that was like very respectful on your part. So I think you didn't really give him any opportunity to find an easy way out. Like,
yeah,
like Bill Crystal did, you
yeah.
know?
Well, but in both cases, right? Like they have enough status that they imagine that they can take on any comers that's some guy they've never heard of before.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, how could I? And it really kills me. I mentioned this on Tom Wood's show. It's kind of stupid, but I feel like if I don't address stuff that I screw up, it just feels weird. So like, and there's a lesson here for all like decent people to like give other people the benefit of the doubt when they claim that they didn't mean the thing that they said. That like sometimes they really didn't. And like I misspeak sometimes. I say the craziest stuff sometimes. I one time talked about how everybody knows that after World War II ended in 1846. Wait, what? Like, how am I 101 years off there? Or is that 99 years off? I can't even do math. I'm so stupid. Like, how could I say that and not even realize I said it?
Yeah.
Right? Like, no, 1945, not 1840. That's when the U.S. v. Mexico, man. That's a totally different thing. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah.
Anyway, so when I was debating Clark in that interview,
Mhm.
I was in the middle of his title. I was saying in the 1990s, this guy was the chief of policy planning on the Pentagon Joint Staff. And somehow in the middle of that, I said CIA. I said he was the director of joint policy planning for the CIA on the joint staff and like, what in the world? I swear to God, my brain didn't do that. It was just my mouth alone, purely autonomous, without any instruction whatsoever. Because, dude, when I say Pentagon joint staff, like, I've never been there. I don't know. But like, I picture a room from a TV show or something where there's like a bunch of generals in a big room and they have piles of papers and colonels running around doing
Mhm.
policy planning. Like that's the joint staff. It's in the Pentagon. It's in my brain there. That has
Right.
nothing to do with Langley, which is way over there.
Yeah.
And where they don't wear olive green at all. And it's like I'm not confused about the difference between the military and the CIA, Tommy. I never thought that Wesley Clark was in the CIA How did my mouth do that? How did my mouth say that? I'm in the middle of going, he was the chief of policy planning for the Joint Staff of the Pentagon. There's just no room in there for Central Intelligence Agency anyway. And and I'm pretty sure now in hindsight too, I didn't, yeah. I did not even notice that I did it until I watched the recording later. That was what it was. And when I watched the recording later, because I would have corrected myself then and said, gee, when I watched the recording later, I could see Wesley Clark cringe, like, what CIA? Like, he makes this face like, dude, you're so stupid. But then, like a moment later, I could see that he recognizes that I didn't mean that it was purely I just misspoke, because the rest of everything I'm saying, I know what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
About what he was doing while he was on the Joint Staff in the director of policy planning on the Joint Staff in the Pentagon when he was an Army general in 1996 working
Right.
for the chairman, right? And so he then realized that like that was just a flub. But what an idiot flub to make. Like I have no idea how I could have possibly misfired and made that phrase in the middle of that statement is just completely beyond me. How I could even misfire so badly like that. It's just ridiculous.
Well,
Um,
now that you say it, I think I remember hearing you say that, and I kind of like I think I kind of paused too, but because he didn't react to it, like he didn't stop you and say, "Hey, man, that's not correct."
right.
I don't think it's anything that I picked up on, consciously.
Yeah.
Because now that you say it, I'm like, oh yeah, he did say something like that, and I was kind of like, but because you kept going and everything you did say after that, I think it was just like, oh, he, like you said, he didn't mean it or whatever. And so because he didn't react to it and correct you, I think it just kind of, it's just kind of nil. It doesn't matter. People say I say things all the time. I can't remember what it was, but the other day I was recording a podcast and I said something and then I was thinking about it later and I was like, that wasn't right. Why did I say that? That was, and it's just you just like you
One
said, you
time,
misspeak.
one time I said that Glenn Greenwald ought to be taken out back and shot. And then I listened to it late. I didn't even realize I said it until later. And of course, what it was I had read a Greenwald article about Paul Wolfowitz. And I was saying that Paul Wolfowitz ought to be taken out back and shot, which I still stand by that. But I somehow said Greenwald, who was, especially at that time was my friend. We had talked all the time back then. Uh,
Right.
and he's still great. I've always been a good little green bot, as Jeremy Sapienza would say. But I totally didn't mean to say that, and I didn't realize that I said it. Had no idea that I said it. My ear holes did not go, hey, dude, did you realize that you just said that about Greenwald and not Wolfowitz? Like register the feedback loop thing? Nope,
Yeah.
not at all.
Yeah.
What
But
can I
all
say?
right, Syria. So what happened? Okay, just my curiosity of this is kind of selfish because I go to an Antiochian Orthodox church, and so many of the people, the people that founded the church in the 1800s were Lebanese and Syrian, and so a lot of the people I go to church with are Lebanese and Syrian, many of which are talking about moving back to the region of Lebanon, and so I'm just curious for my own personal, what happened in Syria? How did it take place, and what's going on now?
Okay, well, look, going back, the previous dictator, Bashar al-Assad, inherited the country from his father when his father died. His older brother, was supposed to be the dictator, but died in a car accident. He was an ophthalmologist in London, if you could believe it, when his father died, and he was drafted to come and be the dictator. He's a member of the Alawite sect, which is sort of a break off of the Shiites, but sort of predates them, but is sort of kind of, married to um, that sect in a way. Um, and they're about a 10%, I think, minority of the country, inhabiting mostly in the far west and Latakia province. I'm really not the best expert. I shouldn't elaborate too much about that, but that's, I think, essentially right. And then they, the government, of course, it wasn't just a strong man with magic powers, right? It's a coalition government built on its major backbone was it was a Ba'athist dictatorship, which is like right like the commie Nazis of the Middle East. Um, Same as Saddam Hussein in Iraq. Um, in comparison, at least, it's a modernist type regime compared to Islamists who mostly want to go backwards. Um, for what that's worth, I mean, you could see why people would prefer Islamists to the communists back in the battle days of the Soviet Union. But without the threat of the USSR, you would think that leftists would be preferable to Islamists. You know what I mean? At least they
Hmm.
are interested in the material prosperity of people under their control or claim to be somehow. Um, and they're not just talking religious terms, a lot of these would be theocrats, and many of whom are would be absolute tyrants and lunatics too. Um, but so the rub, Tommy, is that the Alawite Ba'athist regime in Syria was allies with Iran, the Islamist Shiite Islamist fundamentalist dictatorship there that's ruled since 79, the Ayatollah Khamenei, who's ruled since 89, and Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. And now people may or may not have heard of the clean break. This was a strategy written by the American neoconservative David Wormser and his buddy Richard Pearl. Douglas Feith also signed on to it. And it was written for Benjamin Netanyahu when he was incoming prime minister in 1996 after a Netanyahu fan had murdered Yitzhak Rabin, who had been pushing this sort of pseudo two-state solution, but was way too much for the right wing. And so a Netanyahu fan murdered him. And then his successor, Shimon Peres, launched a short-lived war in Lebanon that helped to radicalize the 9/11 hijackers, the Hamburg cell of 9/11 hijackers. In fact, it was Naftali Bennett who did the major under Shimon Peres, who did the major strike on the UN shelter and killed 106 women and children in Qana in 1996. That helped put Mohammed Atta and Ramzi Ben Al-Shib and their friends in Bin Laden's camp. Anyway, then Netanyahu comes in, and David Wormser says, "Okay, listen, screw Oslo, land for peace. That's over. We don't want that. We want that land. The Palestinians, we'll just have to keep bombing them. Screw them." The problem is, if we do that, we have to deal with Hezbollah on our northern flank. And they're a real problem, especially as long as Syria helps Iran support them. So then here's what this idiot David Wormser says. He says, you know what we should do? We should get rid of Saddam Hussein in Iraq. Saddam Hussein, the Sunni secular Ba'athist, not an Alawite allied with Iran, but a Sunni deadly enemies with Iran, fought a 10-year war against Iran with American support in the 1980s, you might remember.
Hmm.
Why get rid of him? Well, because David Wormser idiotically believed, under the advice of the Iraqi exile Ahmed Chalabi, if America overthrew Saddam, then the Iraqi Shiite supermajority would take over the country, but they would be under the dominance of America's friends, the Turks and the Jordanians, and America itself. And then we and our friends would make the Shiite religious clergy in Najaf force Hezbollah to stop being friends with Iran and be friends with Israel instead. That way, Israel can finish stealing all the Palestinian territories and get away with it and not have to worry about Hezbollah on their northern flank. Now, if I ask you to remember the history of the last year, you will say, but Scott, Hezbollah was a problem on Israel's northern flank for the whole last year while they were killing the Palestinians. Yeah, exactly, Tommy. That's because the clean break didn't work. It was a big, stupid, idiotic thing to do. So what happened? They followed this advice when Dick Cheney hired Wormser to be his Middle East advisor, and Pearl and Wolfowitz and Feith and the rest of the group that came in and launched Iraq War II. And then what happened? They brought the Ayatollah's men to power, and they were closer to Iran than Hezbollah ever was, right? So
Hmm.
instead of America and Jordan and Turkey dominating the Iraqi Shiites, why would it was just stupid. The idea that the Jordanian Hashemites, because they claim to be the lineage of Muhammad, that they would just cast a magic spell over these Shiites and they would do what they're told. That's not true. They don't obey the Hashemites at all. Never did. When there was a British installed Hashemite king in the 20s, the Shiites had a fatwa against cooperating with their rule in any way whatsoever. And these guys didn't know anything about what they were doing. So in Iraq War II, that horrible Iraq War II that took up our whole early part of this century here in W. Bush years, 2003 through 8 or 11, however you count it there, the worst of it through '08, um, mop up through 11 there. That whole war, what was the point? We fought a civil war for the Shiite supermajority, who then told us, don't let the door hit you in the ass on the way out, because they're friends with the Iranians next door and they don't need, and they're the supermajority and they don't need us. Well, obviously that was a huge error. So then the Bush government launched what was called the redirection, tilt back toward the Sunnis. Oops, we scored like in soccer, they call it an own goal. When you accidentally go the wrong way and score against your own goalie in your own net. Oops. So since
Hmm.
we did this own goal in Iraq War II, now we're going to try to make up for it. We gave Iran Baghdad. Now we're going to try to take Damascus away from them. And so this was the policy that Obama inherited. In other words, Obama wasn't a secret Muslim terrorist sympathizer. He was a secret Republican terrorist sympathizer, right? He was just W. Bush carrying out the same policy that he had inherited. We tilt back towards our friends, the Saudis, Qataris, Bahrain, and UAE and Jordan and Turkey, right? This is and Israel. This is America's Sunni alliance in the region, and of course the Israeli Jews. Um, and so we'll tilt back toward them, and we'll go ahead and move on, as Wormser himself had advised in the companion piece, "Coping with Crumbling States," to expedite the chaotic collapse to Syria, to go on and destroy Baathism. He says now, um, fundamentalist terrorism may be a problem, but we're just going to have to find better allies against it than the Baathists. So he considers bin Laden. Like bin Laden had just blown up the Khobar Towers and killed 19 American airmen. They blamed it on Iran, but Wormser, must have known. They'd blown up the World Trade Center in 1993. Egyptian Islamic Jihad, kind of proto Al Qaeda, um, had blown up the World Trade Center. So he goes, "Oh, look, Islamist terrorism is a problem and everything, but we'll just have to find better allies against it than the Baathists. They've got to go." But this is all an excuse for just taking out Israel's enemies. And that's what they've done. They've expedited the chaotic collapse to Syria. Now, 10 years ago when they did this, Tommy, it blew up into the caliphate because the bin Ladenites went east and sacked Western Iraq. But this time, ISIS is more or less on the wane. They really took it on the chin under late Obama and very early Trump last time around. But Al Qaeda, what they now call Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which used to be called Jabhat al-Nusra,
Hmm.
they're now called Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. They have been holed up safe in the Idlib province for the last decade, since the end of the last war, almost decade, 8 years. It's the end of the last war, biding their time. And it took last time around in Iraq, it was America and our Iraqi allies and others there, NATO allies and others. But in Syria, it was really the Syrian Arab army, led by its Baathist government, in alliance with Iran and their IRGC, Quds Force, special operations guys, Hezbollah from Lebanon, and the Russians came in late 2015, finally. And in fact, when Al Qaeda was threatening to sack Damascus, Russia finally intervened in 2015 and launched this massive air war against the CIA-backed Al Qaeda forces there and mostly destroyed them and saved the Baathist government last time around. Well, this time around, Russia's busy in Ukraine. And this time around, Hezbollah just got their ass handed to them in many ways. I'm not saying they're completely down and out, but they're extremely busy dealing with Israel in their own country, Lebanon, next door. And the Iranians, if they were coming, they didn't have enough men, and certainly that they could deploy fast enough to prevent the lightning strike. It was an October 7th type of pseudo type surprise attack. They broke out of their Idlib province pen, and they immediately, within a space of, I think, 11 days or something like that, 12 days. I think Lindsay Snell told me this. I think it was less than 2 weeks. They sacked, I believe it was first Hama, then Homs, then Aleppo, then Damascus, and drove Assad completely out of there. So now, this guy that's taken power, his name is Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, and he's a Saudi who fought against America in Iraq War II. He was part of al-Qaeda in Iraq, later the Islamic State of Iraq, and later the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, ISIS, and the same guys that built the caliphate. Now, in 2013, the two major factions split. The Iraqi dominated faction of ISIS split away from the Syrian dominated faction. And it was the Iraqi dominated faction that built the caliphate and threw all the gays off the roofs and executed all the Iraqi Air Force cadets and all that crazy stuff that we all remember from the ISIS caliphate fight. These were the guys that stayed in Syria and went west. But as I say, didn't get too far because finally the Russians and the Iranians intervened and Hezbollah intervened against them and rolled them up and pushed them into the Idlib province. So that was where it was left. But so these guys, certainly back then, they were chopping heads and doing suicide attacks and all kinds of stuff. Clearly, Tommy, over the last, through the Trump administration, I don't know what all was going on the whole time, but partially, certainly during the Trump administration and into Biden, Jelani was under not just the support of, but under essentially the total control of the Turks and in the cooperation with the Americans, where they started dressing him in a suit. I swear to God, it's like these people listen to my show. Maybe they don't, but it is just funny that I would always say, look, man, this guy wears that 3-piece suit and shaves his chin every morning. Okay. This guy is dressed like Obi-Wan Kenobi and sets off suicide bombs. You understand the difference? Right? And so what they do, they took him out of his Obi-Wan Kenobi robes and they put him in a 3-piece suit, like literally with the vest and maybe not the pocket watch, but they like dressed him up in a suit and
wearing a monocle.
Okay, so, yeah. In fact, they should have given him a monocle and a top hat. I just read, oh man, was it the Wall Street Journal? I think it was the Wall Street Journal. Was it the Wall Street Journal? I'm so sorry, but it was like from terrorist to Islamist. Wait, what?
What?
Well, they were Islamist terrorists trying to create an Islamic state, but now you're saying essentially they're going, well, look, they were terrorists, but now they're moderating. In fact, here I got this new book, and there's another one coming. There's 2 books like this. And I'm not sure if they're both apologetics or not. I haven't had a chance to read them yet. I don't want to like put too much judgment on them. I had ordered another one that's supposed to arrive any day now. So from jihad to politics. And this is essentially about the rebranding of Al-Qaeda in Syria and telling these guys, listen, Al-Qaeda in Syria, if you want to be the government of Syria, you're going to have to tone it down with the throwing gays off roofs and suicide bombings and heads choppings and all of that. You're going to have to become more like Erdogan, more like the Saudi sheiks, and then we'll tolerate you because, hey, we hate the Shiites more. But, you got to understand, Baghdadi up there in the Mosul Mosque, up there on the balcony, like a cross between bin Laden and Mussolini, declaring that he is the Caliph Ibrahim, ordained by God to be the dictator of all true believers and all that. That's too damn much. Not that. But short of that, hey, if you can get rid of the Shiites for us, if you can break Iranian power, then fine. And that is what has happened. I mean, Assad is gone. His regime is gone. He's in exile in Russia. And Iran has been taken down a peg in Syria, big time, finally, as according to David Wormser's wishes from 30 years ago before he put us through all of this.
This guy that's in charge was he one of the is he affiliated or because we don't hear about the white helmets anymore, but that was a big deal back whenever
white helmets were, yes, they were essentially the PR team for this same group.
Okay.
And I don't know. I guess there's not much fighting, right? Like they say it was like a big coup de main. A few big battles and they took over the whole damn country in the space of a week and a half. And
now, how much did Israel tying up Hezbollah and Gaza and Russia being tied up with Ukraine assist in the overthrow of Assad?
A lot.
Yeah.
To be clear here, just because of the way you phrase the question, so people aren't confused. Hezbollah never went to Gaza, right? They're in southern Lebanon, but they opened up a northern front against Israel with missile attacks back and forth.
Yeah.
Pseudo in defense of the Gazan Palestinians. That makes sense. Not that they like fielded an army there or anything like that. That's Hamas. That's separate and different and all Sunnis. No Shiite, virtually no Shiites among the Palestinians. That's a separate group. in southern Lebanon there, just to be clear about that.
Yeah.
But yes, Hezbollah was not available. Russia was not available. As I say, Iran, the Ayatollah may have sent legions if he had the time to. I don't know if he had the wherewithal to send. I mean, certainly he had some advisors there and stuff like that, but he would have had to send a lot of troops to back up Assad. And if he ever meant to, he just didn't have the time to get that done.
Right.
It was one
Yeah.
big jailbreak, and they sacked the capital city so quickly. And then yes, the Russians are whatever presence they had um, in Syria, it was not any major part of their air force. All that stuff had been brought back to Russia for the war in Ukraine.
Yeah, that's
So
what I had heard somebody say. It appeared that the Russians got forewarning about what was going on because they like pulled out like a week before it all took place or something like that.
that may very well be true. That look, this is on. There's nothing we're going to be able to do to stop it. So get our guys out of the way. They had good
Mm,
enough intelligence about what was happening there.
right.
Yeah.
Right. I know one of the guys I go to church with, he's like, I don't know, 72, 73 years old. He's from Lebanon, but he has family and friends that live in Syria. And he said that for the first time in a long time, the people are the Christians in Syria. The way he described it, it sounded a lot like the original United States and the way the country is set up. And so your villages are built around your religion. And so like the Christian villages are just all Christian. They're not exposed to Muslims. And he said for the first time the Muslims are beginning to go into the Christian villages to take over the villages and take control of the villages. I
Had a lot of that
haven't
10 years ago too. And their rule was absolutely brutal.
Right. And I haven't heard a lot about that about what's going on there, but I'd read Brad Hoff's book last year, Syria Crucified, where
Yeah.
he talks about he interviewed I think it's like five or six different Syrian refugees that had moved to the United States, and they talk about the war in Syria and how they were treated. And I've been in communication with him. I texted him the other day actually asking how the people he knows in Syria are doing. But
This
it's
was
a
a real
very
problem. This was a real problem. I think I started to say this a minute ago, Tommy, but I trailed off on some other point. But I was going to say there that the dictatorship there represented a coalition of the secular Sunnis, which is probably most of them, as well as the Shiites, the Alawites, and all the different kinds of Christians there. And I
mm,
know there's Maronites, and I'm sorry, I have in the book all the different kinds, but I forget all their names now. The Chaldeans are mostly the Iraqi Christians, I believe. But there's the Maronites and a few other different major sects of Christians there, including
mm,
the oldest Christian populations, continuous Christian populations in the world, dating back to the first or second century or whatever it is.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. I mean, well, if you read in the Bible, if you read like the Acts of the Apostles, Antioch was the first church set up by Saint Paul, and so
well,
that's
they
like
say that
one of
there
the
are
oldest
Syrians who still speak
Christian
Aramaic.
populations. Yeah,
Mhm. Yeah, there are
yeah,
people there that still speak Aramaic, which is they say the language of Jesus from back then or would have been.
right, right.
And yes, look, these people 10 years ago, when it was ISIS and Al Qaeda, then they were occupied and ruled severely. Maybe, in the anecdote from your friend here, the villages he's thinking of escaped that. Maybe they were in the far west of the country and remained under Ba'athist protection. But Christian villages did fall under the control of the terrorists last time. And it was maybe not as bad as you might fear, but it was still
Yeah,
horrible. They were still murdered and taxed and treated terribly unfairly compared to everybody else. And like I mentioned that this guy Jolani's clearly been to Turkish finishing school or public relations school. But what about all his men? Like if he really is going to be this much of a warmed over, moderated Al Qaeda guy, then his Al Qaeda guys are going to kill him.
hmm
And I can't remember. It was Lindsay Snell. I interviewed Lindsay Snell, this great reporter, American reporter from over there, who's so smart and so good on this stuff, and went to Idlib province, was kidnapped by Al Qaeda and released and stuff, like our friend William Van Wagenen as well. Um, but she said that look, he has spent a lot of times getting rid of all the people who might challenge him for power and might be jealous of his power, might be angry the way he kowtows to America and Israel. he's isolated himself from the kind of people who threaten him. Certainly, he's had in mind that he better beware. But I think ultimately, Bin Ladenites are as Bin Ladenites do. I mean, how moderate can we expect these people really to be? Um, and I don't know how you judge it. Like, if they're smart, it's Rothbard, I think. I never knew who to credit for this. I think it really is Murray Rothbard who said the radical becomes conservative as soon as he takes the capital city, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
So now that you've won, do you really want to blow it being an idiot? That's why I dismiss a lot of these rumors about the Taliban as planning to attack the United States. No, they're not, man. They got their Islamic revolution in one country. They've always been happy with that. And that was always the divide between them and Al Qaeda. That's why Al Qaeda did not include them on the plot against the United States.
Right.
Was because they had already sacked Kabul. They had already won. They were trying to consolidate their control over Afghanistan, not try to create some worldwide revolutionary caliphate on some, you know, Mohammed slash Leninist doctrine. You know what I mean? They had no interest in that. Why would they do that? That was Bin Laden and them that had all that in mind.
Now, is it true that it appears that the U.S. is finally removing troops from Syria after
Well,
all
that's the
this?
headline today is that Trump said he wants to. I don't know if he actually made the order for them to withdraw yet. The headline I saw was he wants them out.
I was scrolling through antiwar.com before we got on here, and I saw something about it, but I didn't get to read the entire article.
Oh, this is a pretty thin report. I don't know. This is like it's a Turkish report that the White House had mentioned to the Israelis that they want to get out of Syria.
Mm,
Well, I'll tell you, you want to know something fun. You go back, remember in 2017, 18, when they talked about getting out of Syria, Trump talked about getting out of Syria. And I guess this would have been in 18, especially. And they had this huge PR campaign about the Kurds. Oh, no, the Kurds. What about the Kurds? Our allies, the Turks, who we apparently have no influence over whatsoever, are going to murder every last Kurd if we don't stay there and back our allies, the Kurds. Um, but then if you actually just looked at the news, there was like 100 stories
hmm.
saying this is all about Israel. Leaving Syria is betraying Israel. We can't leave now because, well, for one thing, Iran has been more empowered than ever before by Iraq War III. In the war to abolish the caliphate, America had to ally with Iran and the Quds Force again
Yeah.
against bin Ladenites. So, and Syria was at that time more dependent on Iran than ever before. So, at that point in time, the whole attempt to overthrow Assad had only backfired. It had only empowered the bin Ladenites and empowered the Shiite alliance and solidified the Shiite alliance. So they said, no, America can't leave because Israel. And you can find, I swear you'll find a dozen news stories like that from especially the Israeli media, but also European and American media as well. That like all the critics, not all the critics, half of them are saying, right, like to our families out here in the world, oh, it's the poor Kurds. We got to protect the Kurds. But
Hmm.
then you look closely. No, that's not what this is about. This is about we did Israel's bidding in Iraq War II, backfired. We did Israel's bidding in Syria, backfired. So now we have to still stay to contain the results of our last two horrific interventions over there. That was all. And there, some of them
Well,
were upfront about it.
and I guess that explains why I don't remember the guy's name, but I think he was a general that was in charge over there, and he had lied to Trump and said that he had removed many of
Uh-huh.
the troops. And
Yeah.
so I guess this brings us to Hegseth because it seems to me like Trump is looking for that guy to put in charge that is going to follow the orders when it comes to things like that aren't really popular with the ultra Zionists.
Yep.
And Trump has his own. I don't think a lot of people will call Trump a Zionist. And here's the way I look at Trump, and maybe this is a mistake, but what I see just from the last 8 years of watching Trump and his first 4 years as president is a guy with like that has like the average mindset of an average American about government that has
Yep.
been put in charge of a government and he's trying to run it as if he were like one of us, right? And so whenever they call Trump a Zionist, I think that's missing what Trump really is. Trump is an American, and we were all taught from a very young age in America to that Israel is our number one ally, and we're supposed to love Israel. And I think that's where Trump's mindset's coming from.
Also,
Whereas like a Biden is a true Zionist.
well, Trump also, and I don't know everything about what he thinks and believes about this, but like I think he always felt like Sheldon Adelson was his bigger brother in the casino game, right? Like
Mm,
was bigger and better and more successful at playing the same game that he had actually failed at in Atlantic City. I think he always really wanted to impress that guy. But of course, an Israeli spy named Miriam Adelson married him for his money and his ability to control American politics. And so, um, she spent. I had heard 100 million, but I just saw a thing this morning that said that she had donated a total of $213 million to various pro-Trump organizations during the campaign here to help him win. So
hmm
she didn't give him $213 million for nothing. The deal
right.
there is, and the Palestinians get screwed. And you could see how, and this is going nowhere, at least for now. I don't know what he could possibly do to change this, but it goes to show who has his ear on these issues.
hmm
Is he goes, well, we should just cleanse them all out of there. We should just get rid of them all, send them all to Jordan or Egypt. They'll be way better off there. They can finally live in peace. We'll just build them some housing in Jordan and Egypt, and they'll just go. And he says, there's 1.5 million of them. Well, there's 2.5 million of them actually, and they're not going anywhere, dude. The Even if Egypt and Jordan accepted them, they'll fight. We just saw this. And Hamas hasn't gone anywhere. They killed, you know, high tens of thousands of people at least. They didn't
hmm
destroy Hamas. And Hamas is not going to just sit still and let them cleanse everyone into Egypt, even if, I don't know if what are the Egyptians going to send in their land force to corral all these people and kidnap them and pull them south of the border? I can't imagine what price would Egypt have to charge to do that? Like, there's just no way in the world that's going to happen. Um, but so it goes to show that he doesn't know what he's talking about, but he's bought and sold on this issue. Now, look, when it
mm
comes to Israel, they can do what they want. I made a deal, and I think I don't know exactly what all was promised in the negotiations with Netanyahu, but I think it's almost certain that there's already an agreement that the Israelis are going to annex officially the West Bank in the Trump years. I don't know at exactly what point,
mm
and then whether they'll start a massive. I mean, there's horrible violence going on in the West Bank right now. They've stepped up everything in the West Bank since the ceasefire in Gaza already, but if they can carpet bomb the hell out of 2 million, 2.5 million Palestinians in Gaza, they can bomb the hell out of 3 million Palestinians in the West Bank too.
right.
And just a massive air campaign against the Palestinian cities on the West Bank could drive a number of them into Jordan, as civilian refugees if the Jordanians will take them. Um, that could be the plan. But Trump clearly has, I mean, like, first of all, it's just completely illegal. Are you kidding me? That's an absolute textbook war crime straight out of the Geneva Conventions. No, you don't get to cleanse this land of all the people who live there.
hmm
What the hell are you talking about? This is completely crazy. And he's like, yeah, I don't know. We'll just do that. See, he has no compunction about doing whatever he wants for good or for ill, mostly for
hmm
ill. Horton's law. Um, but I could see that. I could see that getting much worse. And I could see that also. I could see what just happened over the last year and a half and what's coming. Also, being a major motivating factor in turning bin Ladenite terrorists like the kind that our government has been grooming in Syria for the last decade against the United States. Don't forget, America was backing Al Qaeda all over the world, particularly in the Balkans and in Chechnya, right in the lead up to September 11th. Just 1 month before September 11th, Delta Force trained bin Ladenite terrorists in the Kosovo Liberation Army were invading Macedonia, trying to create a greater Kosovo. And and they'd been trained by the Delta Force, not even by the Rangers, by our top tier guys. Um,
Mhm.
and that was finally ended by the Macedonian government. Actually, just won a big battle against them and forced them out. And it was the Americans who came and evacuated them out of Macedonia. That was a month before 9/11. And in fact, Ali Soufan, the FBI counterterrorism agent, he wrote in his book that the Chechen terrorists would ask bin Laden, why do you want to attack America? They helped us in Afghanistan. They helped us in Bosnia. They helped us in Kosovo. Now they're helping us in Chechnya. And you want to attack them? And bin Laden's like, yeah, well, you guys just don't understand. Because there's still the whole question of America occupying Saudi to bomb Iraq and support for Israel against the Palestinians and the Lebanese.
Right.
And as I was saying earlier, um, it was Operation Grapes of Wrath in 1996 when they bombed a UN shelter full of women and children, presumably Shiites, in southern Lebanon. And bin Laden put that in his first declaration of war. And so when Perez launched that assault, Mohammed Atta and Ramzi bin al-Shibh had already decided they wanted to join up the fight against America and Israel somehow. They weren't exactly sure how. And then it was just a couple months later that bin Laden put out his first declaration of war against the Americans occupying the land of the two holy places. And right there in like the third or fourth paragraph, he starts talking about the Qana massacre. He says, we'll never forget the severed heads and arms and legs of the little children that Israel bombed in Lebanon. And this is why Americans must pay. And so, as I like to say, this is what they did not explain after September 11th. That, well, what happened was some Egyptians had been recruited by a Saudi to kill Americans to avenge what Israel had been doing to the Lebanese. Got that? Right? Like nobody
Yeah.
knows what it is. They know that you love your mama. And boy, that makes them angry, Tommy. That's all you need to know.
Well, what one of the questions I would have about all this is, and I guess we just got to sit and wait and watch it play out because, I mean, like you said, it's hard to know what's going on in Trump's mind. Um, I wonder what role Saudi Arabia is going to play in all this and how much influence they're going to have over Trump because he really likes the money that the Sauds have,
Yep.
and he likes the monarchical power, and he admires them. And so it's going to be really interesting what role all the Emirates play, really, and how much leverage they're able to maneuver on Trump, especially with him trying to complete the Abraham Accords. No matter what you think about him, Trump believes in those Abraham Accords, and he wants to normalize relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel. And I think annexing the West Bank is a no-go for Saudi Arabia. I don't think that's going to fly with him. Even if the government of Saudi Arabia would accept it, I don't think their citizens would accept it.
Well, I mean, this is exactly what it comes down to, right? This is the only break on Netanyahu doing that is not Trump. It's the Saudi kings and whether they'll be able to possibly tolerate it. Because of
Mm,
course, with the complete cleansing or massive war and cleansing of the West Bank means also including East Jerusalem, which means the loss of Muslim control of the Al Aqsa Mosque and the last
mhm.
of the holy sites in East Jerusalem. So that would be a massive defeat for
Right.
all of the Islamic world and every Islamic state who didn't do anything to prevent it. So yes, you're right. That would cause an absolute crisis of alliance and power throughout the Middle East. There could be violent revolutions and coups and overthrows and wars and new alliances um, throughout the region after that. There are already, within the American-backed Sunni alliance system over there, there are major splits, right? Where, the Qatar versus Saudi and Turkey versus Saudi. Sometimes they cooperate, sometimes they don't. Qatar has interests in common with the Iranians, shared gas fields, and Bahrain has a supermajority Shiite population, even though they have a Sunni monarchy there. So, and they have, at various times they go back and forth with their different relationships with the Egyptian dictatorship military regime there, and so of course the Hashemite kingdom in Jordan. All of these things, if there's a real cleansing of the West Bank, all of that gets thrown into question in a way that the extermination campaign in Gaza over the last year, I think, has not caused.
Well, not to mention what will happen in Africa. if Boko Haram pops its head back out up, because I mean, you want to talk about brutality. I mean, everybody's familiar with Al Qaeda and ISIS, but Boko Haram they're vicious.
Yep.
Those
And they're
they're
worse because of Obama, because Obama's Libya war, the
hmm
jihadists then, many of the jihadists then fled down into Mali and hijacked the Malian revolution that was already
Oh, it
going
was
on.
Mali. For some
RS.
reason, I was thinking it was Somalia, but okay.
Yeah. Well, no, Somalia has been going on since before that.
Mm,
But then when the Libyan bin Ladenites were down in Mali, that's where they connected with Boko Haram, and they said, "Hey,
mm,
you know what you guys need is some Korans and some and some AKs and some training. And here's how you
right.
throat, buddy." And like
Yeah.
so just made them worse. I mean, they were already down there. And Boko Haram, it's funny. I don't know if you remember this. They would say Boko Haram means that Western education is bad. I'm like, well, wait a minute. Like, I already know what haram means, right?
Yeah.
So you're telling me Boko means Western education? Really? And then it's like, no, of course, Boko means lies, and more particularly, lies by white Westerners who came and told these people why they were supposed to accept being
Right.
tyrannized by foreign powers and whatever, by the Christians or whatever all their beef is. Um, that was what Boko stood for, was the deceptions of the Westerners who had come. That was what they said was haram. And then, of course, ironically, again, yeah, it's America on the side of the bin Ladenites that helped to empower those guys and make them that much worse. And you're
Well,
right,
and
there are fighters
they don't
throughout.
take into consideration that, especially in Africa, and I don't know if this existed anywhere else because Beatrix is from South Africa. I've read not a lot, but a little bit of their history and how their political parties formed. And if you look into the forming of the ANC, which was what's his name? Oh, the famous president from South Africa. I'm blanking on his name.
Oh, Mandela.
Mandela. Thank you. If you want to look at how that party came into power, what happened there was they got in bed with the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union had recruited the Vietnamese to go into Nigeria. The ANC then went up into Nigeria and they trained under the Vietnamese fighters in Soviet tactics. And so then when they come back down, they came back down into South Africa. The reason they were known as being a terrorist organization is because of the military training that they had gotten from the Vietnamese in Nigeria. They come back down and they're Americans like often forget this, but they were despicable people. Some of the things they did, they had this thing they called necklacing. And what they would do is they would take a tire and they would hang it around somebody's neck and they would fill it with fuel and light it on fire. And they weren't doing this to white people. They were doing it to the small little impoverished settlements. And you'll still see these settlements on the side of the road in South Africa. Basically, it's homeless people that have just got found like 10 and built them little shacks. I call them little shanty towns, but they're little settlements. And they're all over South Africa. And they would go into these settlements in order to get the support of the people in the settlement. They use violence and force, and they would go in there, and the most outspoken against the ANC they would murder, and then they would recruit all the others to join the ANC. And it was a terrorist organization before it was a political party. So like this history in Africa exists of calling in foreign nations. Now you can only imagine, you know, Iran goes into South Africa or into Africa and starts training up Boko Haram and the military tactics of Iran. You never know what's going to happen there. So that because that place is like you have your like kind of western areas of Africa, like Namibia or South Africa, and not even all of Namibia. A lot of Namibia is just empty. It's just vacant. It's like driving through Wyoming, but um, but those are a little bit more westernized. You get into like Nigeria and Somalia, Ethiopia, and these places, those people don't give a shit. They'll go to war over anything, you know, which is why this whole conflict between Ethiopia and Somalia has been going on forever, after the West came in and tried to draw borders for, African countries. It was just like, it's like the Kurds could have their own country if they weren't divided by these manufactured borders.
Right.
So this is why I'm kind of curious about Hegseth, because I think it really depends on the way that the United States like addresses all this is going to determine how out of control it gets. And I think Hegseth is going to have a really big role in that. I don't think necessarily he's going to be a puppet of Donald Trump like a lot of people think. I think he's looking out. I think he really believes what he's saying. I think he really cares about the troops on the ground, and he will look at the
Oh, that.
atmosphere and the environment.
I mean, but you know what? Like, I'm sure Tammy Duckworth does too, right? You could be a veteran and a hawk. There are a lot of great veteran doves, but
Mm,
there are a lot who are like Tom Cotton, like, hey, I was there, and so I can send 1,000 more or 10,000
mm.
more to my place. Feel great about it. Um, so I just don't know. I know that Sheldon Adelson backed his veterans group that was, troops for staying in Iraq. Like, are you kidding me? Whatever it was called. But that was a long time ago.
Yeah,
And I really don't know. For all I know, he read enough already. I don't know. But I do know this. He supports Defend the Guard. And I mean that present tense. Not he said something nice about Defend the Guard a couple of years ago, but I just found out that he said again in a recent interview, like very recent interview,
yeah,
that he still supports the Defend the Guard movement. Well, and in fact, even castigated, I'm not sure which interview, I only heard about this, but even castigated the Pentagon for sending generals out to oppose it. And so, man, that's going into the brand new season. We've got Dan McKnight. And for any veterans listening to this, you need a mission. I got a mission for you, dude. You sign up with Dan McKnight and Diego Rivera and the guys at defendtheguard.us and bringourtroopshome.us. And this is the most important project in the country right now, the most important anti war movement in the country right now. It's all led by Ron Paulian and Trumpian right leaning veterans of these terror wars of our era. And they're trying to make it the law in the 50 states that the president cannot nationalize the guard troops and turn them into regular army and use them for overseas combat without an official declaration of war by the Congress as prescribed by the US Constitution, as is the law of the United States. And so they've already been making huge progress. And Trump won on anti-war ness, not just Ukraine. He won on anti-war overall, not on
right,
we're go get the Ayatollah for Israel. That's not what he ran on.
right.
So this is what MAGA wants. This is America first, means defend America first. And this is and quite frankly, I'm testifying before the Kansas State Senate today. And my message is simple that like President Trump needs support out in the country. He's got the whole national government that he's taking on here. And he needs the support. He needs for it to be clear to every TV news host that there is a real massive grassroots groundswell of anti war sentiment in the Republican Party and on the right in this country and among veterans and led by veterans of these terror wars against this current policy. They don't want and really against this policy. No more world empire. We're not going to fight without an official declaration of war. And make that the law and make the governors sign it. And it's going to take the people. The people need help to do this. But a big part of the argument is this will bolster Trump's efforts. Trump is trying to entirely reorient American policy. I don't know entirely, but almost. He has many times mentioned he clearly believes in, and it could get to this. He has mentioned he would like to bring our troops home from Germany, Japan, and South Korea.
Mhm.
We're done, presumably Italy and the rest. We're done occupying the world. These are first world countries. They could pay for their own defense. And we don't need to be the policemen of the world like this. And no, Russia or China won't take over the world if we step out of the way. They can't afford it either, just like we can't afford it. And this is everything wrong with our country starts with the empire. And so to have a Secretary of Defense, that's unbelievable. To have a Secretary of Defense who says he supports the Defend the Guard legislation, will do nothing to oppose it in the 50 states. Man, this is the time. for Dan McKnight and his troops to go to figurative war here politically and get this thing done. And especially for like military officers, man, I'll tell you a story. Uh, we all went and testified to the Texas State Senate committee one day. They hated me, boy, I tell you.
I
But
remember that.
one of our guys, boy, they didn't like Diego either. But one of our guys went to West Point. His name is Brian Sharp. And he was a captain. I'm not even sure if he was a war veteran or not. I think he was from a time where he did not have to go to war. But he went to West Point and he was like, listen, I'm an officer. I was a captain or a lieutenant colonel or whatever it was. And I went to West Point and they went, you went to West Point? And he's like, yeah. And they're like the one on TV? Yeah. You mean like, isn't that where George Washington went to West Point one time or something? And he's like, yeah, George Washington, dude, for real. And they're like, no way. Oh my God. And like, so, yeah, I mean, it really mattered. It really mattered a lot. That
Right.
This guy was a U.S. Army officer. And he was saying, listen, man, this is all about patriotism. Not only is it not against patriotism, this is what we are supposed to be doing. And they were like, it is? Oh, maybe it is. You understand? It's all about think about it. Of course, they didn't want to hear that from me. They
Right.
wanted to hear it from him.
Mm-hmm.
They were dying to hear it from him. At least they were open to hearing it. It was coming from him. So that's the help that Dan McKnight really needs. You know, I'm going to get up there and I'm going to give him as an America First a speech I can give today. But what they really need is so many Army officers and veterans of these wars, not just officers, of course, enlisted guys, but veterans of these wars. That there's so many of them, they don't need my help no more. They got plenty of guys up there to say, you know, should have been me fighting that wildfire, but I was in Iraq. Should have been me helping those people who were drowning in New Orleans, but I was in Afghanistan. It should have been me, piling sandbags on the banks of the river that overflowed and all of the things that the National Guard people join the National Guard believing they'll be doing, right? Worst case scenario, you'll be like backing up the sheriff's department, putting down a riot. Right.
Right.
But like, that's it, man. That's what you're here for, is to protect the American people.
Mm-hmm.
And so, otherwise you would have just joined the Army, right? That's the
Yeah.
point of the National Guard. So, you know, and Dan McKnight, their leader, I mentioned Dan McKnight, he's been a Marine, he's been in the Army, but guess when he was the commander of a group of guys, a brigade or whatever size team it was, I don't know all the lingo, but when he was in charge over there in Afghanistan, he was in the Idaho National Guard, calling in airstrikes or, you know, whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
And so, so that's got to be put right. America's not supposed to be a world empire anymore. And the Defend the Guard movement is absolutely the vanguard, the most important thing that the anti-war movement is doing right now, the most important part of the anti-war movement. And it is on, and our new Secretary of Defense has on the record endorsed it within the last week, like just the other day. He reiterated that you're damn right he supports Defend the Guard. And that is incredible, Tommy. I don't know everything about the guy. Look, I know this. I know he chose James Mattis. Essentially, well, I don't know this, but I read this, that he said James Mattis reminded him of George C. Scott in Patton. Right? Not even Patton, but just George C. Scott in Patton, standing in front of the flag and marching around talking about patriotism and whatever.
Yeah.
Wow, what a broad chest full of medals you have there. I'm bowled over. And that was how James Mattis, the devil himself, got the job. And said, belay that order. Every time Trump said do something right.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple of times when Trump wanted to go way too far, he stopped him. Like Trump wanted to kill Assad, and Mattis stopped him from that. So go figure. But anyway, apparently this time he was
I thought Trump like Mattis.
Man, maybe I should pick a loyal man, you know?
Yeah. Oh, I was just gonna say I thought Trump liked Mattis because his nickname was Mad Dog. That's that was always the impression.
Yeah, what a big tough guy. What a big tough guy, right?
Right.
But yeah, no, I mean, I think, look, if I had been able to ever advise Trump, I would have told him, listen, man, you got to get freshman congressmen or second term congressmen, pick them from safe districts where you know that a Republican is going to win to replace them, right? But you get loyal guys who want to do what you want to do. You don't just hire a bunch the CEO of Exxon to be your Secretary of State and the CEO of the Marine Corps to be your Secretary of Defense. Are you crazy? Why would you do that? Mattis, I got fired by Obama because he was too horrible for Obama. Not because he wasn't horrible enough, but because he was too horrible for Obama.
Yeah.
The guy who killed more people than George Bush, even that guy. And if Trump had a more consistent worldview, he might have seen it that way. I think he must have learned a lot from what he's been through here. I think he's picked a bunch of hawks, but like, what's one thing about Rubio? Yeah, he's a real hawk, but what else is he? He's a real suck up,
Yeah.
right? So, like, if Trump's rule to Rubio is, look, Rubio, I'll give you the job, but the job is to do what I say, not what you feel like, then
I
Rubio
think
would accept that. Rubio would say, yes, sir, of course, sir, So it could be that was what Trump is really going for this time, is people who are really going to be loyal to him and not undermine him and undercut him like last time. If I was him, that would be my highest priority, is
you know
hire
what
people who like me.
you know why I think he picked Rubio? I think he picked Rubio because Rubio's ambitious. And Rubio
Because Gary
knows.
Adelson gave him a check for $213 million. That's why.
Well, I think it's because Rubio's ambitious and Rubio is going to do whatever Trump asks him to do to make Trump's presidency look good so he can run for president in 2028 and have
Yeah,
a potential of winning. That's
sure.
what's driving Rubio. So I think Rubio's going to stay in line for 4 years so he can try to get his opportunity in 2028.
Yep.
That's just the way I look at it.
Yeah, that sounds fair.
I do think that Trump deserves some credit, and we should, as you say, we should back him in as much as we should go out there and be talking about our projects like Defend the Garden, stuff like that, and say, look, Trump, those of us that are backing you are talking about this stuff. And the
Right.
reason I think he deserves the good graces is because look at what he's already done just in the last week and how many fights he's picking and how many lawsuits are already being filed against him, how many court cases already come, and for doing things that you and I typically agree with as far as
Right.
cutting off
Spending
money,
foreign
cut,
aid.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and
Huge stuff. It's
yeah,
true. And
you
listen,
know,
we were talking about this on the last show. He gave, I wasn't sure when I read it. I'm like, I don't know exactly what I'm looking at here, but I saw Matt Taibbi talking about it with Tucker Carlson too. He
mm,
wrote this open-ended, incredibly broad order to the new director of national intelligence to go fishing through the records of the
yeah,
intelligence agencies to see what you can see.
yeah.
Oh my God. Report back to me if you see anything that you think, might be bad.
Well,
Not
and you
even
wonder,
necessarily illegal, but just like, what do we need to know? I mean, that and Tulsi, boy, she's a pit bull. And I don't know exactly what she's going to focus on there, but that could be regime ending, man. That could be like the national security state. Boy, your game is up when people realize what you really did, who really killed this guy or that guy or whatever it
mm,
was.
well,
Because
and
they are
I think that's why the attacks on her have ramped up since that
oh yeah.
executive order,
They
because
should
now
be
they're
afraid of her, dude. They
yeah,
should.
now they're going
He's a tough
crazy.
guy.
And I know she's due for she's going in front of the Congress tomorrow, I think, with the open door. And then she'll go in front of the security
She'll be
whatever.
fine. All these accusations against her are complete crap.
Oh,
I
it's all
mean,
bullshit.
if people search my name and her name, they'll see me criticizing her for her positions on things that she really is bad on. I mean, she is
Hmm.
not Ron Paul, man. She might not even be Donald Trump. She's a real hawk on especially Sunni bin Ladenite terrorism, but especially on Israel Palestine, a lot of other things. Um, so she is far from perfect. Um, but I think she's honest, and I think she's smart, and I think she's tough as hell.
Hmm.
And she will be loyal to Trump, and she will. If you want me to release all the records on JFK, Mr. President, because I will release them, right? Like that's how she's gonna play, and so yeah, they should be worried about her. I certainly, that's one that I could be optimistic about. I think she's tough enough that and brave enough to really go after him on some things. I don't know on everything, but but hopefully, I don't know. I try to not be too get my hopes up too high.
Yeah, a
And
little optimism ain't going to hurt you.
yeah, a little bit.
All right, man. Well, that was like an hour and a half. So let's plug away and we'll get off of here and we can finish our day doing whatever we got to do.
Okay. Thank you. Me and Tommy, we're at the Libertarian Institute. I'm the director there. Tommy is a great podcast host there. And we got a bunch of great guys. And we've published 15 books and about to be 16 and 17. We're doing one on the national debt, another on Syria coming out very, very soon here. Um, and more than that. Um, Antiwar.com is the most important project on the internet, of course. My book is for sale at scotthorton.org, and you sign up for my podcast feed there. I've done 6,000 interviews, which may be more than anybody's done. I don't know. I'm sure Adam Curry has put out more MP3s than me, but not interviews. So I got 6,000 interviews, all at scotthorton.org and at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show. And I just started publishing the audiobook, subscription only, Substack, and Patreon, scotthortonshow.com and patreon.com/Scott Horton Show. And so far I have chapter 1, H.W. Bush, of the new audiobook out, and I'm hard at work on Clinton and the rest now. So that'll all be coming out in a podcast series in the Martyr Made style there at scotthortonshow.com.
That I was actually going to suggest you do it in a podcast series style. I think that would be great.
Well, it's going to be ultimately like 45 hours long or something. If you
Yeah.
start out like 44 pages was 2 hours. So I did the thing, and it's going to be like 45 hours long.
Yeah.
So it's probably going to take me the rest of the year or something to do, but I don't know.
Well, I'm going to have to go jump on that Patreon so I can keep up with all that. So,
go.
all right,
Well, thank
Scott.
you, Tommy, for having me, man. Great to talk to you again, as always.
This was awesome. All right. I'm going to stop the recording.